It is crunch time, fellas. We are officially 3 weeks away from the fantasy football playoffs. So today we're going to break down all of the week 12 games, matchups that matter. You know what we do around here. Break down over-unders, implied totals, where the sharps are betting, who has good matchups, who has bad matchups at every fantasy football position. So let's get things kicked off. We do have 6 teams on bye this week, which means we actually only have 13 games to talk about, and we will have to dig a little bit deeper into the archives for flex players and defenses and kickers and quarterbacks and tight ends and all that good stuff. So tonight we're getting it kicked off with Browns and Steelers. The Steelers traveling to Cleveland for what sounds like it might be a messy game as far as weather is concerned. I heard some freezing rain talk. It's supposed to be cold. There's going to be some conditions that we have to pay attention to, so keep that in mind if you're starting, Cedric Tillman or David Njoku or Najee Harris or whoever. There's going to be probably a little dependency towards lower scoring game environment in this one, hence why the over-under is 36.5 points. The sharps are hammering the under right now. Again, probably likely due to the weather conditions, but also given the fact that these two teams like to play football, AFC North style, it's possible that it's just going to be low scoring game in general. Pace of play is pretty solid when it comes to the actual key matchups that we need to pay attention to in this game. Both quarterbacks have bottom 12 matchups, so when you factor in the weather and the fact that they don't have good matchups, you probably don't want to be messing around with Jameis Winston or Russell Wilson. Can't imagine most people would, but because of all the bye weeks, there's definitely better options out there on the waiver wire. Nick Chubb and Najee Harris are probably going to be relied on heavily in this game environment given the weather conditions, but Nick Chubb having the much better matchup of the two, Najee Harris going up against a top 7 Browns run defense. George Pickens has a great matchup, but how much does the passing game get it done through the air tonight? George Pickens versus the Cleveland secondary, 25th against fantasy wide receivers. Jerry Jeudy is expected to see shadow coverage from Joey Porter Jr. according to fantasy points. Maybe they'll, swap him over on Cedric Tillman half the time, Jerry Jeudy some of the other time, but fantasy points does expect it to be Jerry Jeudy who gets shadowed, so good news for Cedric Tillman and for Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore has the best matchup on the field going up against Beanie Bishop in the slot, but again, weather conditions might throw a wrench into that. And then both tight ends, I believe, are top, streamers that you could go after. David Njoku, of course, an every week starter, given the target share he gets. Given the weather concerns, I probably wouldn't mess around too much with Pat Freiermuth, but if you have to dig deep at the tight end position, I suppose you could do worse. And then definitely, given what we have going on tonight, you could definitely be starting the defenses. I think a lot of people might be concerned about starting Chris Boswell tonight. I wouldn't be overly concerned about it. Wind is not going to be really a major issue. It's just going to be kind of precipitation and cold weather, and I think that actually plays into Boswell's favor a little bit. So if you have Boswell, he's literally the kicker one on the season. You should probably be starting him. Chiefs at Panthers, the next game that we're going to talk about here. We got 7 1 p.m. games, 3 4 p.m. games, 1 Sunday night game, and 1 Monday night game. Like I said, there are 6 teams on bye, which means we are missing 3 games from the schedule. Chiefs at Panthers, the first game of the 1 p.m. slate here. The Chiefs are 11-point road favorites against Carolina, so heavy favorites even despite traveling to Carolina there. Implied for 27 points are the Kansas City Chiefs. The over-under is set at 43 points, which is, about average on the entire slate. The over catching a bit of the steam, though. Kansas City's DVOA on offense. Huge matchup advantage, biggest on the slate versus the Carolina Panthers defense, and this game projects to be pretty fast-paced as well. So I think on the Chiefs side of things, you should feel comfortable starting Patrick Mahomes, who has a top 5 matchup for fantasy quarterbacks, Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco, and Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks. These are like the 2 backfields in the NFL that we just really don't have any idea who the starting running back is going to be, what the workload split is going to look like, because Chuba Hubbard and Kareem Hunt have been great in the absence of who we thought was the incumbent starter coming into the season, but we don't really know how it's going to look when both of them are on the field because we haven't really seen it yet. So Kareem Hunt and Pacheco versus the Carolina run defense, awesome matchup. Chuba Hubbard and Brooks versus the KC run defense, awful matchup. It's literally the worst run defense on one side, the best run defense on the other side. I would not mess around with Pacheco or Brooks if you don't have to. I would like to wait and see a game of ramp up from those players before I threw them into my lineup. Both wide receiver cores have below average matchups as well. So you're probably starting Xavier Worthy if you need to, because he does have, the big play upside and so on and so forth. And you're probably also starting DeAndre Hopkins. And on the Panthers side, I think you can start, Xavier Legette, maybe Jalen Coker, but it is a bad matchup for pretty much every receiver in this game. Kelsey has the 32nd ranked tight end matchup, so he should probably go off in this one. It's going to be a big-time Kelsey game by the looks of it. And then Kansas City's defense and kicker are both top 12 streamers in my rankings this week. Moving into Vikings at Bears, the Vikings are 3.5-point road favorites against Chicago, which to me is a little bit of an interesting total, knowing that the Bears are the team that's at home and they've been playing a little bit better with Shane Waldron now gone. Over-under is set at 39.5 points, so kind of a ho-hum game environment. Under is catching a ton of the steam here too, so maybe a slugfest incoming for the Vikings at Bears. Key matchups to pay attention to. Both quarterbacks have bottom 10 matchups. Do not mess with Sam Darnold. Do not mess with Caleb Williams. Both of them are playing kind of up and down right now too, so you don't really want to rely on that in these kind of money weeks leading up to the fantasy playoffs. Aaron Jones, great matchup for him. He's going to be in your lineup. Keep an eye on the workload split between him and Cam Akers. It took a little bit of a shift towards Cam Akers, a little bit more than usual last week. That might have been a result of the Aaron Jones rib injury, but we'll have to wait and see on that. DeAndre Swift, terrible matchup for him on the ground, but he is getting the work, so you're probably starting him anyways. Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison versus the Chicago secondary. Terrible matchup for those guys, so Addison I don't think is a must-start guy, but Jefferson, of course, is in your lineup every week. DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and Keenan Allen have very good matchups. Conversely, I think DJ Moore is the only must-start guy there, but you could mess around with Rome Odunze or Keenan Allen if you have to fill in for bye weeks or whatever. Both tight ends have average matchups, so if you wanted to start TJ Hawkinson, you probably should, given the workload that he sees through the air. And Cole Kmet, I think, is a pretty decent streamer if you're looking for one, because the Bears, just in general, their passing game, pretty decent matchup across the board. Moving into the Titans at Texans, a little AFC South showdown here. Not a good game environment. I mean, the Texans are favored by 8 points. They're implied for a decent amount, but the over-under is just 40.5 points. Aside from the Texans side of things, it's a low over-under. It's the Sharps are absolutely hammering the under right now, and the pace of play and the DVOA advantages are pretty low of the respective offenses. So anybody who's not like an every week starter, and in this game, you got Nico Collins, who's an every week starter. I would say Tank Dell more often than not, an every week starter, and Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, probably good starts, but other than those guys, I wouldn't really mess around with a whole lot of other players. Of course, Joe Mixon on the Texans as well. Key matchups to pay attention to. Both quarterbacks have top 12 matchups, so sneakily, CJ Stroud may be a guy that you might be tempted to play, but I actually have him outside of my top 12 quarterbacks this week. I think there's better options who may even be available on your waiver wire, but because Collins is back, I think you could play him if you needed to. Both running backs have bottom 12 matchups, but Mixon is definitely still in your lineup, and I think Pollard probably as well, given the workload. Calvin Ridley versus the Houston Texans secondary is one of, all the good matchups that Calvin Ridley has rest of the season. Literally the easiest schedule of any wide receiver in fantasy, but he does have a good matchup this week. Probably another pass-heavy game script in order, given that they're over a touchdown underdog to the Houston Texans. Nico Collins and Tank Dell versus the Titans secondary is not going to be a great matchup for those guys, but the Titans are this weird defense who are not allowing a lot of yards, but are allowing a lot of points and a lot of touchdowns. So maybe you get some big plays here and there. Maybe you get some touchdowns from these receivers and running backs. That's probably what's going to end up happening. The Texans defense and Kaimi Fairbairn are primo streamers at the defense and kicker position. So definitely go and grab those guys. I'm sure they're probably rostered in most people's leagues. The Lions at Colts, the next game that we're going to talk about here. The Lions are 7.5-point road favorites against Indianapolis. The over catching quite a bit of the steam, and it's already a high over-under to begin with. We got a 50.5-point over-under total. The advantage goes to the Lions offense against the Colts defense. Big time advantage there. We know what the Lions have done this year. They've been running up the score on everybody. They're scoring points left, right, and center, so no surprise there. The key matchups to pay attention to, Jared Goff and the passing offense in general have above average matchups. Goff has the 25th easiest matchup. The wide receivers slightly above average on the league this week. So definitely fire up your St. Brown, your Jameson Williams, your Jared Goff. Gibbs, Montgomery, of course, also very easy matchups for them too. So all your Lions are going to be out there, assuming Sam Laporta plays. He also has the best matchup on the field of any Lions player. Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson are probably the must-start guys on the Colts side of things. Anthony Richardson has a tough matchup, but he has been running a lot more in the one game that we saw from him coming back off the bench against the Jets. He ran the ball 10 design times, which other than Lamar Jackson, nobody has exceeded that total. So if he's going to run that much, he is definitely going to have a place in people's starting lineups. I have him as a top 15 streaming quarterback this week. And then, of course, Jonathan Taylor is an every week starter, so he is in your lineup as well. Josh Downs, probably the only must-start player at wide receiver given the target share that he's been seeing, but he is definitely a very solid option. And then, of course, if you want to play the Detroit Lions defense, going up against a turnover-prone quarterback like Anthony Richardson, that makes a lot of sense there. Patriots at Dolphins. The Dolphins 7.5-point home favorites here, 46-point over-under, the over catching a good amount of the steam. So maybe a get-right spot for Miami. They're implied for 26.75 points. We saw them put up a pretty solid week against the Raiders last week, scoring over 30 for the first time, I think, since like the beginning of the season. The Patriots at Dolphins, key matchups to pay attention to. Tua Tagovailoa versus the New England pass defense is a very good matchup, and they've been a lot worse as of late than they have been, earlier on in the season. So I like Tua Tagovailoa and the Dolphins pass offense to really get things going. Both running backs have top 10 matchups, so you're starting Devon Achane for sure, and you're definitely starting Ramondre Stevenson as well, given their workloads, and of course Achane, an absolute star, so he's in your lineup all the time. Tyreek Hill is expected to see shadow coverage from Christian Gonzalez. This was noteworthy because Christian Gonzalez is very fast, so he might be able to keep up with Tyreek. He's also very physical. Might be able to disrupt him at the line of scrimmage. I don't think Jalen Waddle's going to do a whole lot because he hasn't done a whole lot this year, but this does kind of line up as a good Jalen Waddle game when Tyreek is seeing shadow coverage, but hopefully he is able to get things back on track. I probably wouldn't start him given how bad he's been, but if you wanted to start him, I do think he's not the worst option. Sit all Patriots wide receivers. The Dolphins very good against wide receivers, and none of the Patriots receivers are good. Anyways, Demario Douglas, the best one, probably still not worth a start. If you're looking for streaming tight ends, there's two in this game that make a lot of sense. Hunter Henry, probably the better option given the matchup, but Jonnu Smith, also a pretty good option given the fact that Tyreek is expected to see shadow coverage. Jalen Waddle hasn't been very good. Jonnu Smith has actually been like the number 2 option in the passing game as of late. But moving into the next game, we have my Tampa Bay Buccaneers coming off of the bye against the New York Giants. Also coming off of the bye, the Bucs are 6-point road favorites going to MetLife to face Tommy Cutlets. And the New York Giants know Drew Lock. He was not chosen to start, and Daniel Jones was benched for financial reasons. They don't want to have to pay him injury incentives when they inevitably move on from him after this season is over. Over-under, under catching the steam. Not a very good game environment overall. Pace of play is decent. Tampa Bay's offense has a decent DVOA matchup as well, and because the Bucs have been so bad on defense, the Giants actually have a half-decent matchup too, but the Buccaneers are getting a lot of pieces back. As a Bucs fan, I can tell you we've been really, really susceptible to our second cornerback, and it looks like Jamel Dean is going to come back from injury, so that would be massive for the Bucs secondary. We just signed Mike Edwards. Winfield's gotten a little bit healthier. I think the Bucs defense will look a lot better than they did, in the 4 or 5 games before the bye, because they also played a bunch of really good teams at that point in time too. So I do think we're going to see a better Bucs defense. So I wouldn't mess around too much with any non-must-start players like Tyrone Tracy and Malik Neighbors being the only 2 guys you would have to start on the Giants side of things. The Bucs wide receivers and Baker Mayfield are going to get a huge, huge boost because not only is Mike Evans expected to return, Jalen McMillan is expected to return as well. So that's their number 1 and their number 3 receiver coming into this season, coming back, and you don't have Ryan Miller and Raheem Jarrett starting at wide receiver for you. So that might impact Cade Otton's target share, might impact the running game's target shares. But regardless, it's good for the offense. Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, both very viable, like top 24 plays at running back this week in a good matchup against the Giants' run defense. Tyrone Tracy, good matchup for him, so he's in your lineup. And Malik Neighbors, great matchup for him. He is in your lineup despite the change at quarterback with Tommy DeVito. Malik Neighbors gets so many targets, and it's a good matchup. You got to throw him out there. If you're looking for a streaming defense, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against Tommy DeVito is a very, very good option. Streaming tight end, of course, Cade Otton, a very good option, although his matchup is not very good against the Giants. They've been really good against fantasy tight ends. Next up, we have the Cowboys at Commanders, the final 1 p.m. game on the slate. Like I said, there are 7 1 p.m. games to leaf through here. Cowboys at Commanders. Commanders 10.5-point home favorites. The over-under set pretty high at 45.5. I think the under catching a lot of steam makes sense there. I wouldn't expect the Cowboys to score a whole lot of points. So unless the Commanders just absolutely boat race them and score 35, it would be hard for that over-under to hit. So I kind of like the under in that game as well. The pace of play, 28.5. Pretty fast-paced offenses. Washington's DVOA matchup is the second best only to Kansas City versus Carolina. So I feel pretty good that this is the bounce-back game that Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin and Brian Robinson all need because, they were susceptible to Joe Mixon last week. B-Rob's going to have a good game. Both running backs actually have top 12 matchups in this one, so I think Rico Dowdle is actually a half-decent start as well. Jaden Daniels, a great pass defense, get-right spot for him to go up against. Both defenses are pretty league average against wide receivers. Keep an eye on Marshawn Lattimore making his season debut for the Commanders. They have not, used him yet, and they haven't deployed him yet, but it's possible that they put him in shadow coverage on CeeDee Lamb. So keep that in mind, even though it's not listed anywhere. I just thought common sense-wise that would make some sense, but we don't actually know that for sure. Both tight ends have bottom 10 matchups. I don't think you need to start Jake Ferguson or Zach Ertz, given the game environment and the offense for the Cowboys. Jake Ferguson's taken a big-time hit. He also suffered a concussion last week. We don't know if he's going to clear the protocol in time. And then the Commanders, Zach Ertz, he gets targets here and there, but it's a tough matchup for the tight end position. If you're looking for streamers, Washington defense and kicker are very, very good ones. So we have 3 4 p.m. games. This one's probably the worst of the 3. Broncos at Raiders. The Broncos are 6-point road favorites against the moribund Las Vegas Raiders offense, where, Gardner Minshew is probably going to start, but it's not going to be a great game environment. Outside of Brock Bowers, there's nothing exciting about this Raiders offense, and we also have no idea what running backs are going to be healthy for this game because Alexander Mattison suffered an ankle injury last week. Maybe he's going to be out, but we don't have really any updates other than that he missed practice yesterday. And we don't know what the state of the union here is on Zamir White as well. But the over is catching a little bit of the steam, is a faster pace of play type of game environment. The key matchups to pay attention to, Bo Nix is a great streamer this week. I have him literally as like a top 6 quarterback because the Raiders are so bad against the fantasy quarterback position. And just in general, they're just such a bad team. Javonte Williams had a great game last week. Only 14 opportunities, but he should have a good opportunity to score a lot of fantasy points again against the Las Vegas Raiders. Terrible run defense. The Raiders running backs, again, we have no idea who that's going to be. If it's Madison, Zamir White, and Amir Abdullah all healthy, I think it'll be Madison. But if Madison is out, Zamir White probably takes the load. If Zamir White is out, then it's probably Amir Abdullah taking most of the workload there. So Denver's run defense, league average. Whoever ends up starting is probably a viable, like, low-end flex play because of all the buys. Cortland Sutton and Brock Bowers both have difficult matchups, as does Jacoby Myers, who is expected to see the Patrick Surtain treatment. So not a good game environment. I'm not really sure why this game is expected to hit the over because all of the pass catchers have terrible matchups. I guess maybe the run game gets things going, but do you trust Javonte Williams and whatever Raiders running backs are going out there to score a lot of points? I think this is going to have to be some Bo Nix magic if this one is going to have to hit the over here. So I kind of like the under 41 points in that game. 49ers at Packers. The Packers are 2-point home favorites against San Francisco, who is not really playing that well, even though they got a win against the Bucs before the bye week. It was a pretty close game, and they barely won despite the Bucs having absolutely no starting wide receivers. And, of course, they got beaten by the Seahawks last week. The Green Bay Packers, not really in a great position right now because the 49ers defense has been playing pretty well, but we'll have to see what Nick Bosa's health status is coming into this game. The over-under of this game is set at 47.5 points. So Vegas is expecting a lot of points in this one. I'm a little skeptical. I don't know if we're going to get that much of a scoring bonanza in this game because both of these offenses have looked kind of mortal at times, and I could see both of them kind of limp their way to the finish line at the end of this game and it be like a 20-17 victory for somebody. But the Packers and 49ers key matchups to pay attention to, both quarterbacks, bottom 10 matchups. So Jordan Love and Brock Purdy, I don't think you have to start either of them if you have better options in this week's slate. Like there's Bo Nix, Justin Herbert, guys like that I would much rather play than those two specific quarterbacks I just mentioned. So definitely, if you have those quarterbacks, maybe work the waiver wire or whatever. Both running backs have league average matchups. Of course, you're going to start Christian McCaffrey and Josh Jacobs every single week, so no worries there. Both wide receiver cores have bottom 10 matchups, so outside of, I would say, Deebo Samuel, Jawan Jennings, Jaden Reed, and maybe one of the other Packers receivers, Watson or Dobbs, I wouldn't get too cute with, flexing like Ricky Pearsall or even Christian Watson or Dobbs, to be honest. I think Jaden Reed's a, top 24 guy. Deebo Samuel, Jawan Jennings are definitely starts. But other than that, I would maybe steer clear of these wide receiver cores. George Kittle, definitely a great play, assuming he is back from his injury. And then Tucker Kraft, also probably not the greatest play this week, given that it is a top 5 defense versus fantasy tight ends. And he dropped a 0 last week. Stream both kickers and maybe the Green Bay defense. I think that one's a little sketchy, but the 49ers have been somewhat turnover prone and not scoring a whole lot of points. And like I said, I think this game is going to end up hitting the under. So maybe you want to mess around with Green Bay's defense. They've also been very opportunistic this year. They've been getting a lot of interceptions, a lot of sacks, so on and so forth. So Cardinals at Seahawks, the final 4 p.m. game here. The Cardinals are 1-point home favorites, so an interesting, close NFC West type of matchup here. 47.5 is the over-under, so pretty high-scoring game projected. The Cardinals have a top 8 matchup in terms of their offense DVOA versus the Seahawks defense DVOA, so that's definitely an interesting development there. Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr., both great matchups versus the Seahawks secondary. I expect both of them to be very good options this week. Geno Smith, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, JSN, all those guys, about a league average matchup are the Cardinals pass defense, so definitely a pretty interesting spot for them there. I actually really like this game to go over. I think it could end up being a shootout. James Conner's got a good matchup. Kenneth Walker's got a good matchup. This is pretty solid all across the board, to be honest, for everybody involved, so I pretty much just want to start everybody from this game. If you got JSN, throw them in there. You got DK Metcalf, throw them in there. You got Trey McBride, Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison Jr., James Conner, Kenneth Walker, like throw all the guys out there that you should be normally starting. McBride, like I said, also has a very good matchup as well. And then both kickers definitely in play, given the fact that we have a good game environment in general, and potential high-scoring game environments usually mean good things for kickers. Moving in to Sunday Night Football, we do have the Eagles at Rams, which is a pretty interesting Sunday night matchup. 49-point over-under, the pace of play second fastest on the slate. Both offenses have pretty good matchups in terms of their DVOA versus the opponent's defensive DVOA. However, the Eagles' defense has been playing very, very well. So it looks like early edge goes to the Eagles' offense here. Key matchups to pay attention to: Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. Top 12 matchup or so for them. So I am very comfortable starting all of those guys, as you probably were going to do anyway. Both running backs, Saquon Barkley, Kyron Williams, are studs, but both of them have bottom 10 matchups, so keep in mind they may underperform this week. Stafford, Kupp, and Puka are facing the best pass defense in the NFL, especially over the last 6 games or so, as long as Philly has been winning. So Kupp and Puka and Stafford, it could be a down game for them. Kupp and Puka, you're definitely still starting. I would not mess around with Matthew Stafford. There should be better options at the quarterback position. If you're looking for a streaming tight end, Dallas Goedert is a really, really good option this week. Probably one of the best streamers the entire week because of the matchup that he has, and because I think the Eagles could put up points in this one. And both kickers are definitely in play as well. The Ravens at Chargers, the next game we're going to talk about here, the Monday Night Football game. So we got back-to-back games in SoFi Stadium, Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football. The Ravens, similar to the Eagles, are also 3-point road favorites against the LA team. Over under of 51 points, which is the highest on the slate. Over is catching 6% of the steam right now, which is definitely good. And the pace of play is the fastest on the entire slate as well. So this game definitely could end up being some fireworks. We saw what Justin Herbert did against the Cincinnati Bengals last week. You're definitely firing him up there. I have him as my QB4 this week. Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston, both very viable, top 30 wide receivers this week. So I know I'm going to get a lot of questions about QJ this week. I'm telling you right now, Quentin Johnston or Cedric Tillman, Quentin Johnston, or, name X wide receiver who's been better all season. But this is a great matchup, man, for all of these guys involved. So I want pieces of this game. I want pieces of this Chargers offense. Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, and Rashad Bateman also conversely have a very good matchup. Derrick Henry and J.K. Dobbins, maybe some tough sledding on the ground. J.K. Dobbins, this is actually a revenge game for him, as is it for Gus Edwards, because they were both Baltimore Ravens players. Little Harbaugh Bowl here, so it should be a lot of fun. Mark Andrews and Will Dissly definitely in play as streaming tight ends. Will Dissly, I believe, has my tight end 9 or 10 spot, so he is a very good option there. Speaking of streamers, those are all the games. We're going to go through streaming quarterback, streaming tight end, streaming defense, streaming kicker, and then I'll go through my TNF picks as well, as I always do. I go through my Thursday Night Football underdog pick'ems. Going into the streaming quarterbacks, like I said, Bo Nix, excellent matchup this week against the Raiders. He is the premier streaming quarterback, probably highly rostered at this point in time, but definitely a good option. Baker Mayfield, a very good streaming quarterback as well, maybe was dropped by some teams given the fact that his team was on bye. If he's available, he's got Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan back. Cade Otton, of course, has stepped up in their absence, so he is an excellent play against the Giants this week. Geno Smith and Tua Tagovailoa, a little bit deeper names that might be more available in your guys' leagues. If you guys really, really had to dig deep, I don't hate Caleb Williams, but I think you should be able to find a better option than some of the other guys later on down the board. I'm not messing with Stafford. I'm not messing with Russell Wilson. I'm not messing with a bunch of guys that maybe would have been good streamers in weeks past, but they have terrible matchups. So those are my main streaming quarterbacks that I like. Streaming tight ends that I like: Will Dissly, as I just talked about, was a big waiver addition for the week. He's my tight end 9 on the slate, given the fact that he is in the highest scoring game environment on the slate. Dallas Goedert, also a very good game environment, high scoring game there, so I like him. Cole Kmet, like I said, he has the easiest matchup, or one of the easier matchups on the field, given the fact that the Bears offense is in a pretty good spot going up against the Vikings this week. And then Jatavian Sanders, this one's a real deep cut. Like if you need somebody straight off the waiver wire, I think Jatavian Sanders has a chance to have a nice week this week, because the Chiefs are so good against fantasy wide receivers and running backs that Bryce Young's going to have to get the ball somewhere. And I think Jatavian Sanders, given his usage the last couple of weeks, the fact that he scored a touchdown before the bye, I actually don't mind him as like a deep streaming tight end option, or like a DFS play even too. Streaming defenses and kickers, my top 5 defenses, you guys can see them there. My best streaming kickers: Jake Bates, the Lions kicker. He is an awesome play this week. Cameron Dicker, the Chargers kicker, awesome play. Chase McLaughlin, the Buccaneers kicker, all awesome plays. Looking for streaming defenses, those are my top 5 overall defenses in my rankings. The Texans versus Will Levis, turnover machine. He hasn't been as of late, but he just is in general, so I like the Texans defense at home against him. Steelers versus Browns, I mean, monsoon potential game tonight. I like that matchup for the Steelers defense. Broncos versus Gardner Minshew. He has been extremely turnover prone as of late. They could end up being the number 1 defense, now the more that I think about it. The Broncos defense, a very good option. The Buccaneers versus Tommy DeVito. Again, it's his first start all year. Buccaneers getting healthier on that side of the ball. I think they're an underrated option that might even be available on your waiver wire, so go pick them up if they are, because they have a really good schedule the next couple of weeks. And then the Kansas City Chiefs versus Bryce Young. Bryce Young, of course, he takes sacks. He turns the ball over sometimes, so very, very good option there as well. So that is all the games that we've gone through. As I mentioned, we go through every single game. Let's go through the Thursday night game a little bit more in depth here. Thursday Night Football Pick'em, of course, presented by Underdog Fantasy. Use the promo code FSE when you sign up for up to $1,000 in bonus cash and a free special pick when you sign up. The picks that I'm rolling with tonight, Cedric Tillman, higher than 3.5 receptions. Now, again, the weather is a little concerning, so I think it's baked into the projections here, which is why I'm still taking Cedric Tillman 3.5 receptions, because he's gotten eight targets in every single game since Amari Cooper has been out of the lineup and traded to the Bills. So I feel comfortable with his 22% target share, the amount that the Browns throw the ball, that they're still going to throw it, because Nick Chubb and Jerome Ford haven't been great on the ground. Even if it's bad weather, I still think they're going to try and throw the ball. Jameis Winston, speaking of 34.5 passing attempts, he's been over 41 in every game that he started. So even if we're factoring in the weather to some degree here, I do still like him to go higher than that total. And Najee Harris, if the weather is a factor, I like him to go higher than his rushing and receiving first downs. He's been an average of 5 rushing and receiving first downs since week 5, and in every game he's crossed this total. So feel pretty good about all those picks. Again, Underdog Fantasy, promo code FSE to go ahead and tail those. Up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you sign up. This free Jameis Winston free square. So if you don't like that Jameis Winston pass attempt one, you can swap that out for the free square to make sure that this entry is a little bit easier. This would 6x if it ends up hitting. I did actually nail my entry on Monday, so feel pretty good about that one. And if you want to tail the picks, the link for that will be down below in the pinned comment and in the description. Code FSE, like I said, over on Underdog Fantasy. So if you got some value from this video, leave a like, subscribe, comment any of your thoughts down below. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.